When I set up my watercolor palette originally, I also made a sheet that had watercolor swatches, and I'm making a new one today. And the reason why I'm making a new one today is because I want it to fit right inside of my watercolor palette so that I can close up my palette and the swatches are just stored right inside. And I'm going to show you how to make one of these. So it's a really good idea to make one, especially when you're fairly new to watercolors, or maybe you've just bought a few more watercolors, because you can see what colors you actually have. Sometimes when you look down at your pans, they all kind of look the same. You know, you might have 3 blues that look really, really similar, but then when you look at the swatches, you can see exactly what you're gonna get when you actually paint. And some of them are quite different from what they look like in the pans. And the other thing that's really good, especially when you're a beginner, is you can see what the characteristics are like of it. You don't necessarily have all that information memorized, you don't fully understand your colors, but you can see which ones have a really nice translucent color, the difference, you know, once you add a bit more paint so that it's a bit of a stronger color, and you can also sometimes see what colors granulate and which ones don't. So it's a really fantastic idea when you're new to watercolors. So the way I made this is I just measured out the top part of my watercolor palette where I'm going to fit it inside. And then I measured out, and I measured everything out so that I had everything that was exactly the same size. You can even eyeball it, that doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure that you have enough space to put a bit of color down, be able to do, you know, an area that's a bit more transparent than the other, and to be able to label it with the color name. And I also added a line directly through where the watercolor paints are, and that's just so I can show how opaque or how translucent the colors are. And that's especially good if you're doing a lot of ink and watercolor paints. The other thing that's important to do is with the pen that you're using, make sure that it's waterproof, or else you'll get all your colors will be gray and it won't be a good swatch. So now I'm going to show you just the last 2 colors that I'm going to fill in. So make sure your watercolors have a little bit of water. You want them to have already been wet for a little bit. I just put a drop of water onto each of the last 2 pans right before we started shooting this video. And so I just take a little bit of the paint from the watercolor and I just put it on like this. Now this turquoise is pretty strong, and I want to show what it's like when it's a little bit more translucent. I don't have a ton of space, so I can't add more water necessarily to dilute the color. So what I'm going to do is just take a clean brush that the water has been kind of taken off and just try and pull some of the color off. And then for the last color, which is a cobalt teal, take a clean brush again. This one's much lighter, and my cat has come to visit as well. And then I do a layer of the thinner, more translucent paint, and then I try and add just a little bit more, just on the one side, just of the thicker paint. So I can see later on just how different it is when it's thinner to when it's put on thicker. And that's essentially it. Once you have one of these swatches done, you can use it for a really long time. I've left lots of spaces so that I can add more paints in the future, and I can, you know, each time I add a new paint, I can just do a swatch really quickly.